Welcome to Urbanism Vancouver, a podcast that explores how our built environment shapes our everyday lives and community experiences. I'm your host, Helen Lui. Join me as we discover where we live, work, and play, and how we can shape better communities. With each episode, we'll bring a bit of insight and industry experience from myself and my guests. We'll dive into the inner workings of our urban surroundings and explore how places are planned, designed, and built, and discuss ways to create more livable, equitable, and sustainable cities. I hope that you'll learn a little and be inspired to be more curious and more involved in impacting positive change. Before we get started today, we want to acknowledge that this podcast is recorded and produced on the traditional and unceded territories of the Coast Salish peoples, including the Musqueam, Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh nations. We pay our respects to their elders past, present, and emerging, and recognize the enduring connection they have to this land. We strive to have our conversations contribute towards reconciliation and work towards sustainability and equity for all the custodians of the lands. We all need a strong network of support to really thrive and be healthy. With the various demands of busy lives in cities with an ever-quickening pace, it can feel impossible and daunting to connect with the many strangers that we see every day. We've all had those awkward elevator rides in silence, or know a staff at a local cafe but don't really know them. Vancouver, in particular, is well known for being a city full of people who are very friendly but don't actually want to be your friend. So what's the deal? And why should we care? Speaking with us today are Mark Boardman and Alyssa Sacal from Mini Village to dive into the topic of community connections.
Thank you so much for having us on the podcast. Yeah, I'm Mark. I'm the founder of Mini Village. We're a Vancouver-based social purpose company that helps you meet like-minded neighbours, explore local activities, and find your support network, all within walking distance. Our catchphrase is, we're turning neighbours into friends, friends into communities, and communities into resilient neighbourhoods. Yeah, we exist to build healthier, happier communities while combating loneliness and social isolation.
My name is Alyssa. Nice to see you again, Helen. I'm really excited to be on the podcast today and talk about some very important topics. I'm the head of growth here at Mini Village, and I'm really passionate about learning, health and wellness, and also finding innovative ways to make the world a better place. I guess that's why I'm here at Mini Village. I've been in Vancouver for over 6 years now, and I originally came here to continue my education, where I studied sociology and business management at UBC. But yeah, I'm originally from a small island in the heart of the Philippine archipelago called Cebu City.
Awesome. Well, thank you both. Maybe let's start by kind of defining community, right? I think it can mean different things to different people. But if your work at Mini Village is really to quantify that and foster that, how do you quantify that, I guess, first off the bat? How do you define that?
I guess to me, community is almost like this feeling of support and safety and also belonging. You know you have it when you feel like you could be yourself around people around you. You can trust them. And you also have this deep sense of connection towards something larger than ourselves. I feel like a community is absolutely essential for meeting our basic human need for social connection and belonging. But I also believe that strong communities and this ability to bond together, to communicate and collaborate is really what helped us survive all these years. And the sense of community almost helps us weather the difficult times that we're going through and build resilience for things that may come in the future. And it's also kind of a reminder to enjoy life's daily pleasures with those around you and really help live this full life.
No, I totally agree with Alyssa. Yeah, community is a term that's bandied around very extensively. You can find almost every organization or operator or company mentioning the word community on their website. But I think it's also equally important to define what community is not. And I think that, if you think about Facebook's original mission was to give people the power to build community and bring the world closer together. But the question is, has it really done that? Does meeting random people on Facebook, WhatsApp, Nextdoor, and Instagram mean that you have a community? Well, I'd say that shallow, quick and easy relationships that require minimal investment are counterfeits of true community. True community is characterized by ease, comfort, peace, care, responsibility, accountability, and shared norms and shared values. It's almost equivalent to eating canned peas compared to harvested organic garden tomatoes. The problem today is that I think our expectations for community are very low. We're settling for a counterfeit community, not a connected community. Once we have a definition of true community, we can turn to the power of community and what it can really do. So often groups focus on problems in our local area, whether that's maybe a bike theft that's been happening or a stranger danger. Always be concerned about people walking in a suspicious way and the usual problems. But a healthy community doesn't just look to problems around them. They look to each other for help. They take responsibility. They combine their gifts and skills and explore new possibilities and ultimately stand together, looking hopefully ahead into the horizon. That's the perfect definition, I think, for me, of community.
That's so interesting. I didn't even know that was, I've used Facebook before. I'm not on it anymore, but I didn't realize that was the original, goal that they had set out. And it is kind of ironic now that, I'm sure if you asked an average person where they get their sense of community, they probably wouldn't say Facebook. So that's really nice. I really like that definition you've put together. One of the things that we had recently done was talk to someone from Happy Cities about, how do we measure some of these, intangible things, right? For example, how do you measure happiness of people in a city? And for me, I feel like the idea of how connected and how much you feel like you belong to your community is also something that's a little bit intangible. So could you maybe speak to, at Mini Village, when you are working with some of your clients or your partners, how do you help them kind of track that? Like if you're partnering up or if someone's coming to you and they say, oh, I've got a building, or set of buildings, and I'd really like people to feel more like a community, more a sense of belonging. What are the things you kind of do to go, okay, here's where you're at now, and here's how we get you to, that ideal of where you'd like to be?
At Mini Village, we take this very holistic, almost resident-led approach to building a sense of community. We focus on empowering the people within the community because that is what a community is all about. They're the soul of the community. It's the people. And so we look to empowering residents and providing them with the tools that they need to connect with each other. And as Mini Village and the team behind it, all we're trying to do is really support this development of vibrant communities, really from the ground up. And we take a very science, evidence-based approach to doing it because we want to make sure that, you need to know if things are working, you need to measure it. And I think it's so subjective to people's feelings. It's so hard to pinpoint what really is happiness and what are the factors that are impacting their sense of happiness and even sense of belonging in their community. We're still learning, and I think that's the important thing. We're always learning to find new ways to measure it, but we do have a process where we do a pilot program over 3 months, and we try to, in the best way that we can, measure how are people feeling today without the Mini Village pilot program implemented yet. How are they feeling connected to their neighbors? How about their building manager or the on-site staff that's supporting them? How many neighbors do they know and can call on for help? Things like that. And then we have the same survey almost at the end of 3 months to see if anything has changed. And there are different criterias that we measure. we're also realizing that 3 months is not enough to build a community, and that's always changing, right? Throughout, and it could take years and years, and that's how big communities and strong communities have been developed.
I've heard a few times now you say you're asking people how many of their neighbors can they rely on. So to me, that seems like a reoccurring metric that's coming up in your survey. Are there other questions that always kind of come up at the start of your survey as like a thing you try to measure at the beginning and then at the end of the 3 months?
Yeah, we actually have about 35 questions that we've thought about before, and they're in the survey. Things like, how do you feel in terms of your connectivity with other neighbors in your building? How do you feel towards even the building managers? What spaces do you most prefer in a building to be using? That's very interesting information to know. We try to kind of work out roughly like how many emergency contacts that you might have. And in previous studies by the city of Vancouver, they said that everyone should have 3 or 4 like really close people that you can call upon in an emergency. And especially in a disaster situation, you need to know your neighbors.
I think we also ask about their level of community participation. So how many gatherings do you attend? How many gatherings have you attended in the past couple of weeks? And so, yeah, we want to be able to measure with mini village, is there a change in that? Do people feel like are there more opportunities of gatherings that they can attend? Are they joining? Do they feel that these gatherings are actually meeting their needs? Or is it something that's just, a template thing, like let's say a pizza night, just for the sake of having something, but it's not actually something that brings people closer together? Yeah, because I think when you host gatherings or events, it needs to be done intentionally and actually meets the needs of the people living in that community.
Up until now, at least in my experience, kind of in the city of Vancouver, people just sort of assume that those things form naturally, right? That maybe you grew up here and it's your network from school or from work or whatnot, or, maybe you move into a building and you either are a type of person who talks to your neighbors or not. So clearly, what you guys are setting out to do at Mini Village is a very intentional kind of building of that sense of belonging based on a physical, like, geography of, say, a building or a couple of buildings. So it's great timing because obviously COVID and the pandemic has really shown us that it was hard to rely on those natural, I quote, natural formed bonds because a lot of people didn't live near their family or their friends. And so they weren't able to rely on that, right? And so I wonder, how many of those emergency contacts did people have around them during the pandemic, right? And had they had this opportunity to build some of that in their building prior to COVID, how could that have positively impacted them almost? So why else do you think that this is an important thing that building operators or people who design buildings should be more aware of and intentionally kind of implement?
Yeah, I think that community involves everyone. It involves the residents, the building managers, the operators, the investors, everyone. And I think that everyone has a little bit of a shared responsibility in that. And just recognizing that everyone can build community. It doesn't take a huge amount of effort or resources to do that. It's more of a gentle prompt that you can do. And so that we have in buildings different standards, whether it's LEED, LEED, or WELL, WELL. And these are very much to do with, the efficiencies and the structures and designs of the building. But I think that operators should kind of think about implementing, a wellness plan for their building, even before it's made. It could be almost a requirement. Before a building is made, you have a wellness plan for your tenants in place. And there are so many benefits for operators if you have a close residential community. People start to form deeper relationships. If there's a noise disturbance, say, late at night, so they won't immediately call up the building manager to complain and ask for an urgent remedy.
Right.
They know the neighbors and just talk to them. And there'll be that sort of understanding. So there'll be fewer complaints. So that's one of the things we'll be tracking as one of our metrics, like before and after, how many complaints are made. And when people feel a sense of belonging and connectedness, they'll feel proud of where they live. They'll look after the building better. They'll keep it a bit more tidy. That could also result in fewer maintenance claims. Yeah, people start to speak well about the building. They might even write better Google reviews. They may even stay longer, although that's not such a problem in Canada. But,
Yeah.
staying in the building, not having to remarket the place is also beneficial.
Yeah, no, I agree. I definitely agree that there is a gap there in terms of, at least in the design and building community, of like, there is a gap of this need to really be mindful of and intentionally plan for the wellness of people, and not just tenants, but also like residents in general in buildings. Do you feel that there is a unique challenge to implement kind of what Mini Village is doing in the city of Vancouver, because there's such an array of like cultures and backgrounds? And maybe could you speak to maybe some of your experiences of living in other communities? Was it easier to build community there? Was it harder? Like, what is your take on that aspect?
Yeah, I guess I never really realized the importance of my community's impact until I moved to a new country. And coming to Vancouver for university was that first time where I really had to leave home. And the first few months were exciting, yes, but it's almost like this excitement died down and I couldn't shake off this feeling of emptiness. And it did take me a couple years to understand what it really was, but it came to me that it was this sense of loneliness and disconnection living in a big city like Vancouver with so many different cultures compared to the small island that I was from, where everybody knew everybody. And I grew up with the same people my entire life. And so it was really this sense of community that I was lacking, and it was giving me this sense of emptiness. And in the Philippines, community was so central to our culture and how we live day to day. Everything revolved around coming together to enjoy activities and even downtime. There were so many structured things, like we have here in Vancouver and in the West, where we would have after, sports teams or after school clubs, peer tutoring. But in the Philippines, we also had, or the culture that I grew up in, we also had more organic, genuine relationships, like with our coaches, with our teachers, with our friends, with our families, and our aunts, our uncles, our teammates, and even your siblings' friends were family, right? And it was this combination of like this variety of relationships and how close we were. Our soccer coaches weren't only our coaches. We just don't go after school to, have them teach us how to play the sport, but we had a very deep connection to them, and they were almost like a second parent. And so I think, this combination of the depth and variety of relationships created this layer of protection, and like that made me feel safe and supported. And it's like at any given moment, you could rely on these people and no exchange was necessary. And I think in Vancouver, it's a little bit harder because there's so many different cultures. And there's also, I think people live such busy lives that social connection and like making time to build community and making time to almost give back to your community is not seen as a daily occurrence, or is not part of the things that you do day to day. So I think cultural diversity in bigger cities can make it much harder to build and feel a deep connection within the community. And I've definitely experienced that, the two differences. But I think it's also that diversity that creates opportunities for cross-cultural exchange and learning from different cultures. And it leads to this greater awareness and empathy and appreciation for different cultures. And it's really that multiculturalism that in Vancouver, and I'm sure in other cities as well, that's creates opportunities to create this greater sense of interconnectedness and also harmony across different communities.
I really appreciated Alyssa sharing her personal stories. She is probably not alone in feeling that it can be challenging to make those social connections in Vancouver. And perhaps this is something that resonates with many who live in larger cities with diverse populations. In a city and country that welcomes and celebrates diversity, it is not always apparent how this diversity can create a barrier for those looking to build connections within their community. I was curious to know what Alyssa and Mark thought about how our physical surroundings, as well as social and cultural backgrounds, impact the way we connect.
I guess my experience growing up in London is very different from Alyssa's. I feel that she grew up in where there's true community in many ways. That's not to say that the UK is completely devoid of community, because they're actually a quirky, fun bunch in many ways. But we are kind of taught in a way to have a stiff upper lip, not to express too many emotions, to keep calm and carry on. And there's another expression called an Englishman's house is his castle. So in a way, having a defined space is something to protect and not to open the doors, protect your castle. And in some ways, these thoughts and feelings are good, like fortitude, grit, strength. But I've also realized that spaces shouldn't define your sense of belonging or your feelings of connectedness. Having an open heart, a joyful attitude, and a carefree kind of disposition brings life into your soul. And just the spaces, that not everything is designed as so beautifully in cities. There are many parts of the world where people don't really have much, and yet they are full of joy. Maybe they don't have many clothes, but they know their neighbors and they feel that sense of support, fun, and spontaneity. And they're able to interact with each other in quite healthy ways, being able to express their own opinions. Maybe they're not always very well thought through, but having that space in a way to be able to express those without feeling judged. They don't fear strangers as much. They don't mind saying hello, and they ask questions. But yeah, I think that true senses of community comes from the people. That's why I keep going back to the people. The design is extremely important. And, I'm so full of admiration for wonderful organizations and researchers at Happy Cities and at the Hey Neighbour Collective and at Tamarack Institute, and projects like the Genwell Project by Pete Bombaci, which is, valuing design as well as the human connection. But I think that the word grassroots has a lot to play with this discussion when it comes to spaces. The roots, those in a way, is a firm foundation, a deep foundation. And I think also asset-based community development. Assets are there, and they're in people. And in a way, we need everybody's assets to build a healthy community. It's kind of, I guess the physical space does lend itself towards, natural collisions of people in corridors and in elevators. But even then, we don't say hello in corridors sometimes or in elevators. There needs to be that community spirit, that kind of permission to say hello. People don't feel that permission sometimes, so they don't say hello at all. There's a campaign in Sweden, I think it's a place called Lula, where the municipality has encouraged everybody to say hello. I think it's basically, it says it means how to say hello to everyone. And it's a big marketing campaign. And that is a start, just to make that first contact. So moving away from the space, but I think that spirit, that initial spirit, is the one that uses the space in better ways.
I'm hearing like it's a bit of both. It sounds like you're saying that there needs to be a physical allotment for those interactions to take place, for people to physically collide with each other. And then obviously there needs to be intent, whether it's coming from individual people or, like you say, like a government initiative or whatnot, this sparking this intention that, hey, we're going to not only run into each other, but make it a meaningful, like, social interaction. And I want to go back to your example of you're talking about how in London, people kind of like regard their home as their castle. And I imagine this like fortress, right? Of like, you're protecting, this is my safe space for me to, do whatever I need at home, which is, I think, very related to perhaps how people in North America think of their home. Like they've invested a lot into it. Like this is where they have their refuge, right? Especially again during COVID. And so I wonder how you in London had the opportunity to have those social connections and those physical, I guess, collisions with other people in your community if home wasn't like the place for it. So where were some of those places, Mark, where you were able to make social connections?
It's a great question. Actually, this is really the essence of Mini Village and why we started it back in the day. Yeah, in the UK, as I said, community has to be very well planned. You have to book someone 3 or 4 weeks in advance. When you go around to someone's house and they provide a pizza, sometimes you'll be asked to provide a contribution to the payment of the pizza. That absolutely doesn't happen in all cases, but I have experienced that myself. Growing up, I guess we always had a spare room in my family home, and this was always let out to international students. And we had people from all around the world: Spain, South America, Korea, France, Germany, Italy. And they seem to all have very strong connections to their family and friends back home. And they seem to have a lot of fun and joy in their lives. And I was always intrigued by that. So that kind of made me determined to kind of venture out of the UK. And I did most of my internships overseas. And I lived and I've worked in many places actually for years: France, Taipei, Greece, Singapore, Vancouver, and the UK. And yeah, that opportunity that I had growing up was very special. Being able to appreciate and see that different cultures have so much variety, richness, the arts. And I wanted to be part of that. It's a very inclusive way to live. Instead of planning weeks in advance, people will just say on the spot, let's go out now. Let's literally go out now to a cafe, and let's go to another cafe after that. And let's meet at someone else's house and come in uninvited. That's very fine. Of course, it's not for everyone, but it's just a more free, kind of like you can just be yourself. Yeah, if they don't like it, then that's okay too.
Yeah, that's so interesting that it was so structured and organized in terms of like these get-togethers. Alyssa, do you have some examples of kind of like what are the norms of, perhaps back in the Philippines or even here now, of like what are some of those places and contexts for which people get together and maybe build those social connections?
The spontaneity, like Mark was mentioning, is something that I miss a lot in the Philippines, because here I feel like people lead such busy lives that you almost have to book them that way, like weeks in advance, if you want to go see your friend for a lunch or for a dinner. And I think the built environment does have an impact on that and how we connect with people as well. And I think what I found here is that, and then we talked about this before, Helen, but it's more so those third spaces, creating more accessible third spaces. So those places that are close to home and don't require spending money to go to. I guess these are almost like hubs where I go to, and I know a lot of people who I know here go to gather freely, right? Like the park, coffee shops with those shared tables, community centers. And I think what's kind of missing here is like those public squares that you see a lot in Europe and in, I guess, more older cities. Research shows, right, that these kind of gathering hubs or third places do really help boost social connectedness and have a huge impact on our well-being. I think it's important in Vancouver to have these spaces because I know for me and my friends, being, in our age, it's really unaffordable. And so I think these are the spaces it makes a huge difference because you don't have to think about the financial limitations of going there and whether, do I have to spend money again? Like, oh, I don't want to spend money. And so, that creates a barrier to meeting people, and it has an impact on how connected you are able to be, right? And I think walkability is a huge thing because I notice this a lot when my friends are living in downtown Vancouver and I'm living closer to UBC. I think it makes it way harder to connect with each other. And so you're going to have to find people who live in the same area that you could walk to, or naturally that's who you end up spending more time with. So having your friends, essential services like the local bakery, your haircut, acupuncture, like things like this, and those third spaces also has a huge impact on your sense of belonging in the local neighborhood because that's where you spend a lot of your extra time when you're not working. I think, this idea of walkability and commuting, I think it goes hand in hand. Mark mentioned this a little bit, but I want to touch on it again, that although thoughtfully designed environments that have access to third places and are walkable have a huge impact on like fostering community connections. We believe that there's almost like an underlying social shift that needs to happen to create more of this centers for connection and also this positive social outcomes. I don't think the built environment alone can actually make this happen, especially after the pandemic, because I think that's a huge thing that we have to account for, is that I feel like people almost need to relearn and remember what it means to truly connect, build trust, and also foster that sense of community in these spaces, right? So
Yeah.
they also need to learn how to use these spaces, because it's not only for one use and it's the only thing you can use it for, but it's like you can use it to connect and so much more. So I think there's an idea of like one space is to be used for this purpose, but I don't think that's the case.
I kind of agree with everything Lisa said. I also think that, property managers and owners, but, they have a massive budget to manage each year with many, many different ledgers, maintenance to everything else. I kind of also feel that there should be a ledger, a GL ledger for happiness, an amount that is devoted to helping people feel a sense of belonging. Yeah, literally a ledger on the GL account to say, yeah, this is what happiness could be for our building. And there is nothing like that on a building's kind of budget kind of sheet at the moment.
Yeah, I agree. I think that also speaks to our systems of how we measure success, right? Like this idea of how some companies are really priding themselves on how they're triple bottom line, right? How they're people, planet, profit. Well, when you look at new buildings that are built, you've got the profit line, right? Because it has to be profitable before you built it. And then you have sort of the planet starting to come in because they're measuring things like you said, LEED or WELL, right? Where they want to make sure that the carbon impact and the environmental impact of a building is being accounted for. Well, how are we measuring then the people aspect? Well, like you said, happiness and connectedness should be one of those. But right now, those things aren't prioritized.
Absolutely. 100%. Yes, I think that, along with all the plans to build and construct a building, you have LEED and all the certifications that you need. So many different standards. The standards are extremely high. And it would be great to, as I said earlier, require builders, operators, constructors to have thought about some sort of plan in advance to make sure that when a building is released, that you also immediately welcome the tenants. Welcome to the building. Take a quick quiz and let's understand what you really need to thrive in this building. That makes a lot of sense to me, and just to be able to improve on that, because there are so many other benefits that operators will benefit from.
For people who are listening, who are like, okay, I'm amped, like I'm on board with this, right? And say, obviously they can reach out to you. Mini Village is like, helping building operators with achieving this goal, but also as just individual people living in buildings, or just people living in any community where they feel like we could have a greater sense of belonging. What are some small things that people can do to really foster that, what you guys are trying to do at the company level?
Well, first of all, we're always happy to connect. So anybody would, please reach out to us at any time. We would love to help out in any way. But I have a few things. The first thing that I think is a tip that I talk a lot about with my friends is that you almost have to adapt to the cultural norms when you move to a new country. And so you have to make time for socializing and connecting with others. I think the same way that you do here for the gym, or you go for a yoga class, or these things, like you have to prioritize social connection. And I find that for the last 6 months, I've really made it a point to see a friend a couple times during the work week, and it's changed so much. It has changed so much for me. I feel like I'm such a more positive person, and I feel like the stressors of work and just living day to day melts away when you have that time where you're just talking with another person. And it could be about work, but it could be about something else. You just forget about all the problems that you're facing. And I think another one is turn your home into a third space. I think my friends know that they can always come over to ours, and it can be a place for them to also hang out, and that the invitation's always open. And it's not only our home, but it's a place for everyone to connect, right? And come together. And so, I think another thing is, 2 more things, I guess, is track and measure what works. Like we said, it's important to take an evidence-based approach. So experiment with your community. Ask your neighbors or your friends or the members, like what is it that you like to do? And experiment with that and see what's the turnout. Are people really liking the pizza parties, or do they want something a bit more intimate? Do they want something like a book club or a yoga class, or do they want a hiking group or a sing-along? Track those things, see what people are really feeling engaged with. Because I think a lot of the times people don't know what they want as well. They'll say, yeah, I want a hiking group. But maybe they say that because they don't know what else is out there. So I think, ask people what they want, test it out, experiment, host something, ask somebody else to host something, see what the turnout and engagement is like, and then do it again if it's successful. And if it's not, then don't do it again. I think the last thing is also don't be afraid to be vulnerable with other people. I think when you let your guard down, it makes it easier for others to come to you and approach you. And I think that's where genuine social connections and friendship really begin. Those are my tips.
I love those. Thank you.
Those are great tips. Yes, I think the first thing is to realize and recognize that social connection is the best thing you can do to improve your sense of belonging where you live and your social health. Having great connections, there are hundreds of studies to show that if you have a close circle of friends and people that you can really rely on, you can increase your lifespan by up to 15 years. And the quality of your life improves throughout your life by having those close connections. So prioritizing those. Maybe you don't really know anyone in your building. The way I did it was, I think we made a cake, shared it, a piece with someone else. They gave us a cake. And then a month later, we went for coffee. And then a few months later, we went camping. And then my whole experience where I live is totally different now than when I first moved in. So just, you don't need to know everyone. You just need a few people that you kind of share similar kind of backgrounds. Sometimes hobbies help, but often your shared experiences are the most powerful things that bring people together. Yeah, bake a cake. That's my kind of tip. Also, maybe, if you feel strongly, get with others and ask the building managers, could we use a space in our building, maybe being planned to be used for something else? Maybe they're thinking about using it for a gym. You could save them $500,000 by using it for a book club or, I don't know, a parents group or something else. So yeah, being kind of like a little bit risk-taking. And I guess that, like Lee said, vulnerability, community is always messy. There is no linear path to a brighter future for your community unless you get to know people, and sometimes they will not want to know you. But there will be others who do. And ultimately, over months and years, the ideal, community is always a dream, but the ideal is for you to get together with other people and to plan, to share, to kind of combine your skills and efforts and build towards something together that is really a brighter and more hopeful future for your community. But that's not going to happen right now with all the systems and structures in place. We just, like you say, residents need to ask for it. Sometimes, we don't know whether we should ask, but you can. And operators, I think that, leaders, any type of leader has a huge role to play in community building. I believe very strongly in moral leadership. People who are wise, who've experienced boards of directors or boards who have the care and the responsibility for their building, their communities, to be able to see much further beyond the next quarter's results or the investment they've made, but to see years in advance. And sometimes you can even think about decades in advance and look back. And when you look back on your life, did I really do something to help others around me? And am I proud of what I've done for the last 30 years? I think those are interesting thoughts when you think about community and how we can all be involved in building a stronger, more healthy society.
That's really beautiful. I love the example that you gave of how you kind of reached out to your neighbors and kind of built those connections. I agree with what you guys said earlier too, that there really needs almost like a shift because everyone's so focused on like, here's the boundaries of my space and my home. And Alyssa, you were saying that people could almost imagine opening that up and creating a space that is shared to build community and build those connections. But I think it's going to be hard, right? Like people are really protective of like, this is my space, my investment. And then outside is where I do like other things. Outside is where I have like community events. And it's almost like we need to blur some of that line so that we expand the things that we feel accountable to a greater sense of community and group of people, and likewise feel like other people are kind of part of maybe our definition of home. So obviously we are targeting to encourage and foster more connections, but is there a perfect, or is there a Goldilocks zone of the number of connections that, maybe science has said is like this many connections is what we want in order to make sure people are like the most happy, the most well connected?
Yes, there is a lot of theory out there about what makes the perfect number in a gathering or a group. And of course, the one that is most probably well known is Dunbar's number. He's from the UK. And yeah, you can basically map it to concentric circles. So the first inner circle is 3 to 5 people, your closest friends and family. And then you go to the next circle, 15 people, those people that you might meet fairly regularly. You could call them good friends. And then you have the next layer, which is potentially 35, and then 50. And then 150 is meant to be the maximum number that you can have any kind of remote connection with. So beyond 150 in your community is like the maximum. I think there have been many studies to kind of analyze that, and that kind of, those circles kind of ring true. But in terms of your quality of your well-being and your feelings of belonging, you probably just need a few people, that inner circle. And often people that we meet, and we've done many surveys, at least 10 to 20% of people in a building do not have a single close connection.
Yeah.
And that is what leads to huge stress over periods of time, and ultimately sickness and hospital visits and all sorts of other things that to reduce your quality of life and increase your risks of many things such as diabetes, heart attacks, suicide, self-harming, all these things. And we kind of often dismiss loneliness as being something that socially awkward people face, but it's not true. Everyone faces it. And to answer the question, I think that I would say like knowing five people really well probably is enough.
That's so great. I love that. Like, I didn't know about that, because then my brain is also then thinking, how do we track that to how we design communities, right? So you're saying like 3 to 5 people in your building or immediate vicinity, right? And then I think you said, I don't know, I'm probably phrasing this wrong, but like 30 or something like in the next round. So then I'm wondering, like, what does the research say about like how physical distance impact your access to that group, right? If those are the people, like Alyssa, you were saying that you could easily walk to or bike to, as opposed to like if that person's like an hour drive away, like how do we design our communities so that those people are closer to us, because then we can have them more readily available to us? Just like some of that kind of like connection.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I think that if there was one thing I would take away from this kind of conversation and try to connect space with relationships, it would be just this. The truth is that meaningful connections in close proximity are crucial to your health and happiness. So people who are living nearby, there's no point having a disaster and an emergency and the nearest person is half an hour away.
Yeah.
Another country.
Yeah.
They need to be there within minutes.
Yeah. Well, there's my conclusion there. I don't even need to write it. That was the line. Thank you, Alyssa, and thank you, Mark, and Mini Village for joining us today for this conversation.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah. Hope we can all make a better world together.
Shared experiences foster a shared sense of belonging, promoting greater trust and more connected communities. Mark said it best. The truth is that meaningful connections in close proximity are crucial to your health and happiness. But strong social connections don't just happen organically. While some connections are shaped by our physical environment, the shared spaces we have aren't always optimized for gathering. But they should be, and we need to do better. Planners, designers, and operators should be more accountable to whether cities are built to foster social connections. And each individual also has a role to play. So talk to a neighbor, give feedback about improving places to gather in your neighborhood, and make time to connect in your community. You've been listening to Urbanism Vancouver, the podcast dedicated to bettering our built environment. Be sure to follow us on your listening platform of choice so you don't miss our future releases. I'm Helen Lui. Thanks for listening. This podcast series was independently funded and produced by myself and Aaron Johnson. Visit us at urbanismvancouver.com.